Hello, everyone. My name is David Grindle. I'm the Executive Director at USIGT, and we would like to welcome you to today's conversation revolving around the No More 10 out of 12. Today, we are hosting leaders from 4 theaters who have found ways to work around this practice. And our conversation today is being moderated by Danielle Passione. So Danielle, thank you so much, and thank you to our guests today. Have a lovely conversation, folks.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle. I'm a production manager at the Studio Theater Tierra del Sol in the Villages, Florida, and I'm also a member of the No More 10 out of 12s working group, and I'm going to be moderating the discussion. And first, I'd like to start off by introducing our panelists. First off, we have Michael Locher. He is the Director of Design for Houston's Alley Theater, in addition to working as a designer specializing in scenery for theater, opera, and dance. His work has been mounted in New York City and regional theaters around the United States, including the Guthrie Theater, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, California Shakespeare Festival, and St. Louis Rep. Thank you for joining us, Michael. Next up, I have Ken Matt Martin, and Ken Matt is the Artistic Director for Victory Gardens Theater in Chicago. He served as Producing Director of Williamstown Theater Festival from 2018 to 2019, where he produced the world premiere productions of Grand Horizons, Selling Kabul, and Before the Meeting, in addition to revivals of Ibsen's Ghosts, starring Uma Thurman, and A Raisin in the Sun, directed by Robert O'Hara. Ken Matt is the co-founder of Pyramid Theater Company in Des Moines, Iowa, where he served as executive director for 5 seasons. Thank you, Ken Matt. Next up, we have Alice Holden. Alice is currently serving as the Director of Production for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in Ashland, Oregon, and has been part of the team reinventing the festival operations during the shutdown. Congratulations to you. She has also worked as Director of Production for the Center Theater Group, has served as the Technical Operations Director for the Kodak Theater, which is now the Dolby Theater, and as a Theatrical Systems Designer for Walt Disney Imagineering. She is one of 4 co-authors for the riveting tech design opus Structural Design for the Stage, and she holds an MFA in Technical Design and Production from Yale School of Drama. Thank you for joining us, Alice. And then we have Janet Allen. She is the Artistic Director at Indiana Repertory Theater, and she began at IRT back in 1980 as the theater's first literary manager and dramaturg, and after 4 years in New York City, she returned back to serve 10 years as Associate Artistic Director, and then named IRT's 4th Artistic Director in 1996. She is now in her 25th season in that role. Congrats. And before we get started, I'd just like to say that eliminating 10 out of 12s can be very complicated. There are no 2 theaters alike in terms of how they operate. We're very fortunate to have 4 incredible panelists with us today who all come from very different theaters, different in size, different in location, different in contracts they utilize, and all of which have their own unique structures and cultures. So what you're going to hear today is 4 examples of people who decided to make the change, and hear about the why and the how, but they are only 4 of many theaters, and there are going to be many different approaches into eliminating 10 out of 12s. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in with the first question for the group here. I'd like to know what changes you made and what was your schedule like before you eliminated 10 out of 12s?
I'll start, Danielle. Thanks. We're a LORT C and D space, and so like many of us, we have done 2 10 out of 12s, about 4 tech days, and then 3 previews, and so we're working under previews, of course. So pretty standard LORT schedule. So I'll just throw out there, and then we'll go on, is we actually found the change very easy. We can talk later about why we chose to do it, but we found it surprisingly easy to eliminate 10 out of 12s. So I'll just leave it there and let other people talk.
Go ahead, Michael.
Jump in. So we have 2 principal stages at the Alley. The Hubbard Theater is our flagship. It's a roughly 800-seat thrust, and then the new house is a 300-seat reconfigurable black box. They are Lord B and C scale spaces, respectively. Our old schedule, typical rehearsal and tech calendar at the Alley, historically would have included three weeks of rehearsal, 6 days, including that's Tuesday through Sunday, typical workday ending at 8 or 9 p.m. And then roughly 2 50-ish hour tech weeks with a pair of 10 out of 12s, often Saturday, Sunday, or sometimes Sunday, Tuesday. Typical for a theater our scale. And as far as I know, it's been that way for a long time. We'll get into details later, of course, but new policy going forward is a 3-week, 5-day rehearsal schedule with Sunday and Monday off typically, and with a commitment to ending the workday by 6:30 or 7 p.m. Across the board. Essentially a regular work week. With tech, the 10 out of 12s are gone simply. It becomes a question of where those extra hours go. Do you drop them? Do you reconstitute them somewhere else? For us, the current plan is the latter. We've added 2 partial tech days prior to our usual Saturday kickoff. Just sort of soft startup, a way to ramp into the weekend with time that's more productive and healthier than the late nights over the weekend. And that practice may change as we go forward, but and we get feedback from artists and tech staff. But for the time being, the takeaway, I think, is just that in terms of complications that the process created, they're minimal and they don't go far beyond what do we do with these 4 extra hours. But the impact in terms of health and safety and fairness is considerable. So kind of no-brainer.
That's excellent. Did you get any pushback at all from directors or anyone else by making a little bit more tech happen sooner in the rehearsal process?
That's a great question. Easy one for us to answer. And I'm curious to hear what the others say. We faced very little pushback, a lot of quick buy-in. Our production staff is very excited, and our collaborating artists have generally expressed a lot of gratitude. We've had a few with a gentle lament saying, oh, I'm one of those persons who loves those long tech days. But to the last, those same artists have also reassured us that it's going to work. It's the right move, and everyone's eager to try it. So pretty easy.
That's great. Ken, Matt, or Alice, did you want to speak to what the schedule was like for you before and what it is now?
Yeah, ours is also pretty simple. It was not a difficult thing for us to do. We are on the CAT contract, which is Chicago Area Theater contract here in Chicago. And under said contract, we were only afforded 1 10 out of 12 in the first place. So it's quite easy to figure out how we eliminate one. And what we did was actually just add an additional tech day and just shuffled around kind of our preview schedule in a couple of different ways to accommodate that. So that was a pretty easy fix for us, and isn't really been a point of consternation in terms of figuring out how do we also still kind of retain the same amount of hours. We're also, of course, like many here, also instituting the 5-day work week, and we're also kind of utilizing a very similar structure to what Michael just laid out at the Alley, actually, which I assume many will probably embrace, that makes Sunday and Monday the off days. So, and have gotten zero pushback thus far, and everyone's actually been grateful that we've been able to institute it quickly and make it a at the same time actually been able to squeeze out more tech time by adding the day. Actually, they've gained a few hours, so it was a pretty simple thing for us to do.
Yeah, Oregon Shakespeare Festival is a different case, but first I want to acknowledge that I'm coming in from Ashland, Oregon, which is the ancestral homelands of the Shasta, Takelma, and Legatwa peoples. But out here in our rep theater world, our tech schedule is anything but simple because look, Michael's laughing. Because, we have to stop teching and tech another show or perform another show. So we don't tech straight through, basically. And also we have to have time for changeovers. But nonetheless, even though we're not a LORT theater, we operate under most of the same rules for Actors Equity Association. So we did have 2 10 out of 12s available for every show. And, as the technician on the panel, I just want to say my term for 10 out of 12s is 18 out of 24s, which I'm sure all the artists also, designers experience that, as you're working from 8 or 9 in the morning until 1 or 2 in the morning and then coming back. And And there's nothing good about it. And frankly, even going to an 8 out of 10, makes it a 16 out of 24, which is like, hooray, right? But at OSF, we had started moving this direction in the early 2020 when we were designing our 21 season. And it is simple. It's like, know the number of tech hours you need and spread them over time in a way that seems doable. And what we had found about 10 out of 12s in general is like exactly what good thing for the show happens after 11 p.m. If someone could tell me that, I would like to know, because I haven't experienced it. So for us, it's about controlling the number of hours and trying to squeeze in that 10 out of 12 with changeovers potentially on either side. It's just simply brutal. So it's a welcome change, no pushback, and simply a matter of scheduling.
That's excellent. We did get a question from the chat. Someone is asking, during the rehearsal and performance week, are you still able to stick to a 5-day work week, or does that have to increase?
For OSF, we are struggling with the 5-day work week idea once we're in the rep. Because if you have to rehearse, if you have a group of people that need to rehearse outside of performance, you start losing time. So we've maintained a 5-day week pre-performance season. And then in the performance season, we're actually trying to nibble around the edges, like maybe a 5.5-day week, or some weeks are 5 and some days are 6. So we're just really trying to craft every week to work for the artists that are doing the work.
Similarly, for the alley, once we transition from the rehearsal into the space itself, we are back to a 6-day schedule, because we have a 6-day performance schedule. That's the model for the time being, and again, the plan is to proceed forward with getting as much feedback as we can from our artists and our staff.
We're in the same place as the alley. That's exactly what we're doing.
We're in a slightly different place, to the extent that our performance schedule already kind of operated on a 5-day work week schedule, because we didn't have performances as often on Tuesdays, except for the occasional student matinee. So we're trying to now kind of look at our schedule in a way that can accommodate those and make maybe some 2-show days, but then we're having to assess like, oh, are we adding double performance days, and what does that mean in terms of the total amount of hours? So that's been a little bit easier for us to navigate in maintaining it once we move into the performance schedule. There's 1 week rather, when we first move into tech, where it technically becomes a 6-day week, but we were able to kind of pick that up in the other way in terms of how we've like fluxed with the schedule on the back end by messing with previews. So we're able to for the most part kind of maintain it once we've moved into performance, but that's just a kind of unique way in which our schedule already kind of accommodated it. So
that's excellent. I'd love to ask for each of you what inspired you to make this change. What was the catalyst?
I'll start, Danielle. No, you start, Michael. I started last.
I'll be brief. I'll try, and then I'll pass it right to you. The truth is that the alley, conversations for this began a while ago. They began before I came to the company. In late 2018, 2019, we hired a new general manager, a new artistic director, and both of those folks came to the alley with reform on their minds. And even prior to 2020, as we all know, many American theaters were facing moments of reckoning, questions about company culture and practices. The alley is definitely no exception. So, from our artistic director's perspective, a lot of those conversations focused on a resident acting company. And we want to make employment arrangements more equitable and secure for them, making a more ethnically diverse body. From our general manager, the murmurs in the industry about better labor practices and better schedules were really resonating. And those two missions, they just dovetailed, making life better for our staff members and our staff actors and our stage managers, and adopting better industry practices. They aligned pretty well. Our season was cut short, like everyone else's, by COVID. And like a lot of companies, as awful as that event was, and you never wished on anybody, it's also provided this opportunity to reboot and to re-examine policies and to implement new policies. So around that time, of course, the murder of George Floyd happened. Subsequent reckoning added even more momentum to the planning. Better labor practices and anti-racism work hand in hand, as we're all discussing and discovering and exploring. So that encouraged even more enthusiasm for the effort internally. And like I said before, when it came time to actually put these ideas to paper, it was a very smooth process.
Our story was a little bit different. I will say that I really had not thought about this until I read about it in We See You White American Theater, and we started talking about it internally. I started talking to a lot of peers, and I had a very gender specific reaction to it at first, because it was very clear to me that the community of most harm is BIPOC women who are caregivers, either of children or of elders or of both. And that just went over me like a ton of bricks, because I realized that I was a mother of children, I cared for elders, and I felt, given my generation, it was simply my job to do that, not complain. Because if I was going to compete in an industry that still has as many men in it as it still does, that was my job. So reading that was, and talking about this with people, was just very mind-opening to me. And I will say that we did it in one sentence. We said, we're going to try this COVID year, and if it works for us, we're going to keep going. And it did, and we will. And we did move to 5-day rehearsal weeks in COVID. But I'll also just add, because many people may be in the same place, we haven't practiced this in an equity platform yet. We worked on a SAG platform all last year. We fully rehearsed and created, produced, and went straight to streaming with no audiences on 6 productions. Now, we used a lot of our equity guidelines because that's what we're comfortable doing. But, and I don't think there'll be any changes. We're actually adopting some of the SAG protocols that we really liked and overlaying them. Of course, equity will predominate with our work. But, I heard so many people, the only pushback I ever got was from people in other theaters calling to say, hey, we heard you got rid of out of 10 out of 12. You're going to make us all look bad if you do that. Really? And even more on 5-day workdays, way more. And people saying, well, equity mandates that we do 10 out of 12s. Equity doesn't mandate it. It's a threshold. You can't do more than that. And when people like Lindsay was part of this for me, explaining the history of equity and saying these rules were put into effect decades ago, when the protection was to try to keep people from having to work 18-hour days all the time. So I'm a dramaturg by trade. When you overlay the history of the union, suddenly a lot of things make sense. And it's really making sense to pivot in this moment. I don't know that we could have physically had the stamina to rehearse 6-day work weeks and 10 out of 12s this year. It was exhausting to work under SAG regulations and any regulations indoors this season that's just finished for us. So when we really got a whiff of how exhausting it was to work under these conditions, we actually don't think conditions are going to improve hugely with vaccination. We're still going to be tired. We're still going to have challenges of people's worry. So about health, about family members, the world is not going to vaccinate itself overnight. So we felt very strongly that we wanted to hang on to these for this coming season. And I believe we'll hang on to the no 10 out of 12s for good. The 5-day work week has a very specific price tag on it for all of our theaters. And so after, we're going to hang on to it as long as we can. And that's really about the prioritizing of decision-making at the top. And it was a big priority for me next year. And so that's what we're going to hang on to. But we're definitely going to play that one by ear. I had older actors this season say, when we get to the 3rd week of rehearsal, right before we're going to go into tech, I don't want a 5-day work week anymore. I want a 6-day work week because I have to keep in practice. My virtuosity depends on keeping the muscles moving. So we're just going to monitor that as we go and see how it goes.
Did anyone else want to speak on what was the catalyst for them?
I think the only thing I can say is that at Victory Gardens, anyway, it was a decision that the staff had made. You know, I've only been in my position for just a handful of months. I was at the Goodman prior to that, where I was also a part of all the internal conversations around how they were going to address things there. And I think one thing that was clear, even when I came to Victory Gardens, and one thing that has been clear in the various spaces in which I've been in, you know, someone referred to ECU already, or whether it be Design Action, all these other varied groups, right, that have come together to articulate things that they want to see done differently when we return. One of the main themes is that we just have acknowledged the culture of exhaustion that exists within our industry as a whole. And the real layman's, you know, version of one of the reasons why I think many are advocating for is because we're tired. It's too much to constantly feel as if we are having to break our necks this way to do this work. And so I in the most simplest of terms, I think in terms of the ways in which many people from various different facets of the industry came together and said, this is not sustainable any longer, was enough for us at Victory Gardens to very quickly say, great, as an institution with a mission that calls for social justice and equity work being central to who we are and what we do, this was a no-brainer for us to very quickly institute. So yeah, that's how it happened for us.
I wanted to comment that, yes, we were having the conversation and made a commitment before We See White American Theater published their demands. But that document really helped us dig into, you know, there's the ask for that, but like, what's what is it curing, right? Which, as Ken Matt said, is about the general exhaustion and brutality of the organization. As Michael said, about anti-racist practices lift us all up. Right. Well, so in a rep situation, we have really different considerations. We're hiring people for months on end, not weeks, for the seasons. And how do we make that life a life that is thriving? And how do we help our year-round folks that are in this repertory blender? Yeah. So I just want to emphasize that, you know, no 10 out of 12s is an easy slogan, but really what those demands are asking is for us to make the industry humane, right? And you can do that in so many different ways than just like ticking off a box from this one thing. There are many ways to make your organization more humane, and you got to really think deeply about that and not just, you know, go along with the crowd, right? Because you eliminate 10 out of 12s, and your organization could still routinely, you know, ask too much of everybody on the show.
I'm going to ask the question about pushback. If any of you received pushback, even within your organization, I know that we have a few things coming up in the chat as far as how do you deal with directors who are in fear of losing rehearsal hours? How do you deal with stagehands that are concerned about losing overtime that cuts their pay? These are all some of the concerns that have come up with the idea of cutting 10 out of 12s. And I'd love to hear how you all have approached them and how you've dealt with convincing others, even within your own theaters, if you needed to.
Can I start out a little bit on this? We haven't had a lot of pushback, but also the chat asked, what is this going to do to designers who are already doing too many shows because the pay is so low that they can't make a living unless they crush all the shows together? And if we all elongate our tech schedules at the same time, then they're not going to be able to do that, particularly lighting and sound designers, obviously. So I just want to say at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, we've also embarked on a new designer pay structure for our 21 and 22 seasons. And a feature of that is to actually pay more if our tech envelope expands beyond a certain limit, right? So that we actually do increase designer pay to account for that extra work. On a side note, red herring, we're also not going with the traditional, like all designers should be paid in the step level that automatically favors costume and set designers and discounts everyone else based on their newness to the industry. Sorry. There's some stuff to be done there as well, is all I'm saying. And for directors, if you provide the tech time they would have had anyway, I don't understand what the pushback would be. And I would say we all know that we make the shows fit in the box that we provide. So how do you fit in that box? You change expectations, plain and simple, right? And you move on. And stagehands losing overtime, I mean, that is a real thing, but I would say that in 8 out of 10 stagehands are getting a lot of overtime. So I would say we're cutting out the ridiculous time, so that people can be their best selves at work because they get enough sleep, right? That's the goal.
I just want to add that I'm impressed by Alice's description of the plans at OSF to re-examine and to revisit designer pay structures. I mean, it's something that I'm a designer myself, and these questions matter to me a lot. So thanks for bringing that up, Alice. And I would just add, on one hand, we're aware. I'm very aware that anytime you extend or even potentially extend tech, you put a potential burden on designers. On the other hand, as a designer myself, I can say those obligations, they already vary day by day, by days or weeks, depending on the company. And beyond that, we're in this post-COVID period where we're examining the nature of those obligations. We're examining our travel requirements. We're examining our residency periods, and thinking hard about how those may look in the coming seasons. But my commitment is to adopt this change without creating any sense of ambush or additional burden. We'd be communicative and flexible about residencies. And as Alice says, I mean, the expectations change as the box changes, and we adapt and we move on. And I'm confident that on balance, this is going to favor the lives of our designers rather than create additional burdens for them.
We've experienced nothing but relief from people and gratitude. So we've gotten no pushback about limiting overtime, which we absolutely did this year, and no pushback from designers. We were trying to be very, very conscious of keeping the envelope as small as we could for designers. Particularly, we had a lot of designers work virtually this year, but lighting and sound designers who had to be on the ground, being very cautious about their schedule and their pay.
All I can add is our designers are some of the main people asking us to get rid of them. So we were, again, trying to be responsive in addition to the fact that we were already having our own internal conversations, right? As Alex mentioned, they were having anyway. So it was easy on that front. Same in terms of directors. For us in particular, we don't quite run into the same issues around the stagehands and the overtime pay in the same way, just because of how we're structured a little bit. But I'm actually glad somebody flagged it so that I can now go ask more questions and ensure that we're being cognizant and taking that into consideration as well.
Have any of you ever had your own moment while you were in a 10 to 12, but before getting to this point where you just stopped and said, why do we do this? Why is this the way it is? Do you have any information you want to share on that?
I just want to, if I may just quickly, I mean, I mentioned I'm a scenic designer aside from my role at the Alley. I'm also a parent. I have 2 small kids. I have a spouse who's very passionate about her work. She has a full-time schedule in an unrelated field. I have mounds of student debt. The last time Alice and I worked together, I was juggling a new baby and a full-time teaching position. I owe Alice many beverages because I was struggling to make it work. And like a lot of us, I've spent a huge part of my adulthood trying to figure out how this life is supposed to work. And while it's difficult and chaotic across the board, there's no greater symbol of that difficulty than those days when you take a theater artist making a modest income and put them in a couple of work days that span 12 hours and stretch to 1 a.m. So being expected to feel good about your educational investment, your income, your health, your family life, while trying to do good, safe work at midnight. I've said to myself many times, so there's no one time, it's many times, this had better be 100% necessary. I better be taking time away from my kids and working at a strange, dangerous hour because it's absolutely necessary. And it never felt necessary.
I'd add just more of the parenting. I don't think I really questioned it in my naivete, perhaps, until I had kids. And then I seriously questioned it every single time. How much you're bankrupting your partner and your children. And, I lament a lot, and I think we've got a long way to go to create a field that really invites people to have families in any amount of comfort at all. I think there's so many issues, more than just what we're talking about, that make having families in our industry really tough. So maybe this is the beginning.
I want to comment on how dangerous theater is these days, with all the automation and all the flying and all the stuff above our heads. And we're working a crew to exhaustion. And the one really strong anecdote I know I have in my personal life is that in an undisclosed theater, in an undisclosed location, we were checking a complicated piece at 11:45, and we said, okay, we're not going to do the jump into the pit, so the crash pads won't be there because we're not going to do that part. And the actor forgot and jumped anyway, and everything was okay. Right, but that's what happens when you work people beyond a line, right? That you actually physically hurt them. In addition to everything everyone else has listed about the overall quality of life, we also have injuries.
Yeah, Alice, that's the one. They mentioned, Danielle, you mentioned earlier in my bio, I'm the former producing director at Williamstown, and I'm sure many here know the culture and the schedule of that particular institution. Many may be familiar, and so that for me was the breaking point when I was there in my capacity as producing director, where I was production, our production department reported to me, and thus I was able, in that capacity, having been a professional actor, also working professionally as a director, freelance for many years prior to that, experiencing it from all of a sudden those being the departments that reported to me, and having to see firsthand, knowing how miserable I felt as an actor and knowing how miserable I felt as a director in 10 out of 12. And then all of a sudden had to face and watch many people injure themselves, unfortunately, and mitigate many situations where things could have been far worse because people were literally just so tired that they were starting to make mistakes that they would not normally make. If that's not enough of a reason for all of us to sit back and reassess the way that we schedule everything, then I don't know what is.
And I also would like to say the No More 10 out of 12's website is collecting information from people who have had similar experiences that want to talk about what the 10 out of 12 process has been like. There's a survey on that website. So if somebody's watching, they haven't taken the survey, please feel free to go ahead and head over there. I do also want to ask this question. What do you all believe is the biggest challenge in eliminating 10 out of 12s? What is the biggest challenge for regional theaters, and do you have a solution to that challenge if it's presented?
I don't think it's that challenging. We made it up. We can make up something different. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit more of the type to just speak really plainly about these things. If it's a challenge, I promise it's one you invented in your head, because we invented this whole thing in the first place. So that's my response to that, is that there is a way, I promise. And you just have to decide, the way we decided to do it this way in the first place, to do it a little bit differently. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I want to chime in and say, I mean, change is hard, and I'm not sure if the improvised, looser way that our industry works is an impediment to substantial change or a benefit. I'd like to believe, and I have to believe, that we're built for it. Theater makers are nimble, and theater makers are supposed to be empathetic. We're supposed to be listeners. We're supposed to digest what a community is about and communicate it. And this is something to process and act on. So completely second everything that Ken Matt just said.
It's just a choice. Simply a decision.
Yeah, I think we've all learned it's a really outdated form now. And we have this great opportunity to change some of this in this post-COVID world. And I think it's so beholden on us to take advantage of that moment of change, of saying, we need to rethink things, and we've got great impetus to do it, and let's do it. I think it's about change resistance too.
Yeah. We also have some potential solutions on the website, the No More 10 out of 12s website with solutions. There's a tab for additional resources, and there's a list of theaters there that have actually eliminated 10 out of 12s. You could reach out to them and ask them questions if you need to. And if you are a theater who has made that change and you don't see your name on the list, please be sure to reach out to the group and let us know about that, because we definitely want to put your name on the list. We had a question about SM teams working invisible hours. Has anyone experienced some of the stage management teams struggling with working invisible hours in order to get the tech done? And how do we handle that?
This is something I face quite frequently in a previous position, and it's something that I am hopeful. I'm really glad someone asked this question that we as an industry can all take a hard look at and really, really think about. I've not yet, because we've not reopened, obviously run into this at Victory Gardens, but it's something that even in our planning right now, that we're being very, very, very rigorous in really assessing, if we do this, how does it affect every single member of the team, including stage managers, in terms of the ways in which they have to facilitate space and schedule and all the other things that go into making some of this stuff work. And it's how we are trying to be cognizant about how we don't want to inadvertently create more work for them or more invisible hours. And so it's something I've run into elsewhere, and I'm really trying to ensure that we can be cognizant of now as we continue our planning.
I'll also get into some of the nitty gritty about people asking if it's impacting morning work calls. Are the actors now on the set earlier because of this new schedule? Is it creating less time for those who have to get work done on the set with lighting before actors get there?
I think to me, we're not really contemplating starting earlier, because we still have the kind of 12-hour lost my vocabulary in the shutdown. We have people coming out performances at 11, so we're not going to start rehearsals earlier in the day. So it actually gives the scenery team and props team and lights and sound more time to do notes, instead of trying to crush them in the morning on a 10 out of 12. The 10 out of 12 ate into the mornings. The 8 out of 10 did not for us. So it's a great boon in that direction, and gives us the flexibility of, we could start at noon instead of 1, and we could all get out of here at 9:30, which is, that feels like a day off, right? When you end it early.
Yeah, to echo what both Alice and Kenmat said. On one hand, as Kenmat said, we're committed to not proceeding with these changes without paying close attention to how it impacts people, and thinking very carefully about everyone's roles in the organization, and making this a benefit to everyone and not a burden. And so keeping an eye on these things as we reopen and as we take these things into real practice is going to be, it's important that these questions are coming up, because we need to pay attention to them. On the other hand, as Alice just said, having our days structured this way provides more flexibility in the day for work calls and for notes, and not less. Our work days are more reasonably sized. We're not compressing a morning work call into the tight chunk of space that may exist at the top of the 10 out of 12 versus an 8-hour day or similar. And finally, it's a structure which doesn't necessarily impact our typical load-in plans in any way. We tend to have our sets loaded in by that point, by the point that is in which we would be front-loading these new potential partial tech days. So again, across the board, it's a matter of just paying attention to these things and trying to make use of the new flexibility the system affords, as opposed to being boxed in by it.
Thank you for that. Have all of you gotten a chance to work under the changes that you've made, or are they still very new?
We have worked under them, but on a SAG contract.
We've not yet had a chance to work under them, at least at Victory Gardens. I have had a chance to work on it. I don't want to speak for another organization that I no longer work for, but at the Goodman, as I was transitioning out in my capacity there as a producer, and had to see the way in which they were implementing those changes, and things were looking good on that front. So
we have not. Ms. Alice, go ahead.
Yeah, it's all in our heads.
Same. It's all in our heads, but again, what's happened in our heads and on paper is they're very manageable little pieces. They're very small little shifts that create this new paradigm.
Yeah, ironically, we are starting with a live show outside, but we only tech that show for 5 hours because we need the night time to do it. So it never was subject to 10 out of 12s. But we are continuing to say, oh, we're not going to work past 11. Right. So that's not the 10 out of 12 rule, but it's the spirit of it, which is part of like, you got to look at all your practices and say, does anything good happen after 11? The answer is no. So move on.
I feel like the answer to this has probably been said many times throughout this, but what do you see being the biggest benefit of making this change?
Less exhaustion, more productivity, less resentment, better work cultures, all good stuff.
And better art.
Yes, I think I want to just say that it's going to affect the way that the work is actually getting made in a way that I hope imbues it with a deeper sense of care, because people have felt cared for, right? And so that's the other thing that I think is really, really exciting as we take the time to really re-envision and dream up a new way of how we make this work in the first place, because it will only, I believe, make the artistic processes and the actual artistic output stronger, because people knew that they were, as we try to portray humanity, that we've done the work to make sure they're treated humanely and not like machines that we need to be running, but actual human beings that we've taken the time to account for their needs in every way. That only makes the work better. I truly believe that.
It's funny. I like many of us, I've spent time teaching, and one of the sad discoveries for me working in the university system was to identify that this paradigm of this belief, this culture in theater that our art is born of blood and suffering and sacrifice, it goes all the way back to high school and college, and it's upsetting. And I think for most of us know that our industry, our community, has a long way to go to make life better for theater artists, to make theater a better agent for social change and for better labor conditions. In the grand scheme, this is a small, easy step. And it's going to take small steps and big steps to make the work better. But on a micro level, we're getting rid of work time that's less productive, and time that breeds resentment, as Janet said, and time that can be unsafe, as Alice highlighted. And it adds or reconfigures it as time that it's more productive time, better time to do better work in. And any changes along the way in this manner that contribute to just a better sense of how our already fraught industry does what it does and makes art and communicates it seems like a win-win.
My artistic director always says, theater takes the time to make in which you give it. And I love that quote because I think it is so true. Let me ask what you would say to another theater maker who has the ability to make this change and hasn't done it yet.
I would say why? For what why are we why? Especially if people are asking and you see that people are clearly figuring it out elsewhere. I just don't understand why you wouldn't if you're able to do so and they're choosing not to. I'd actually ask you to resign, frankly, and maybe make space for somebody who can then get in there and do the work. Sorry, I had to be honest. But if you're able to do it and they're choosing not to, it is just that at this point, a choice.
Ken, Matt, I love your honesty. And I think it's important. I think we need to start having the hard conversations and asking those questions. I would also ask, what can other people do? There are a lot of people that want to see this change happen, but aren't in the position of power to make the change. We have actors, we have designers, we have stage managers. What can they do to be part of the change? What would you suggest?
I think that there's an awful lot of power structure in our business. And a lot of that power structure is not very healthy. So I think people have to bring these things up, and you have to bring them up to your colleagues and your friends and try to get it talked about in a not entirely emotional way about who gets to decide, but about the why. Why? What's the value? I think no matter what hours of the day, we were working an 11 to 7 tech day this 6 times this season. And we found that at about 6 o'clock, everybody'd start saying, God, is it midnight yet? It feels like we're at a 10 out of 12, even though we're not. And, 1 hour of COVID is like, 5 hours is how it feels. All these tropes came up. So exhaustion sets in after a certain number of hours anyway. And I agree with everybody who said, those other 2 hours, it's like nothing happens. You think, oh, great, we've got 2 more hours. Let's push through the, 10 more pages or whatever. And often what we've all found is that work is lousy. You have to go back and redo it the next day anyway. And I don't think we're very honest about that, frankly.
Yeah, and in terms of like how everyone can help, when I was much younger, I'd say it was a pretty strong industry standard that people didn't put legs in a genie lifts, for lighting, hangs, and focus, etc. And now, I mean, I don't have any survey on this, so it's all anecdotal. But now I think it's much less common. And it's not much less common because a bunch of artistic directors and executive directors and managing directors got together and told the technicians to start using the genie lifts properly, right? That's not what happened. The technicians collectively got to an understanding that actually that was really unsafe and we shouldn't do it. And part of that's, because of accidents, but, it's like, it just took a while for us to really understand that. And I think if everybody in the industry starts having a collective understanding about the danger and the damage that the 10 out of 12s do, that ends up creating a new industry culture, which forces the hierarchy that Janet so aptly named it influences them and potentially starts to force them to make a change. If everybody thinks it's a bad idea, everybody thought gay marriage was a bad idea 50 years ago, right? So I think that the work habits in the theater industry are that level of wrong. And it's no, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I mean, whether it's gay marriage or genie lift bad practices or anything else, I mean, it's the normalization of ideas, of better ideas, discussions about better ideas. Well, like many of you, I'm sure I was brought to this table, this specific table, and to the attention of this group by not by gigantic industry power brokers and producers, but by designer friends of mine who wanted me to speak to what my company was doing. And it was a conversation that began as an email exchange between myself and a designer friend, and now has become and now look where we are. We're speaking about this on this platform, in this venue. And we are participating and contributing to the normalization of this idea and the popularization of this idea. And just like lights and genie lifts and gay marriage and millions of other things that make perfect sense, I think we can continue taking steps like these and be surprised at the results.
I'm going to ask one more question that comes from those watching, that is about renting space from the day. And how do you consider working these hours, lessening time when you're doing a space rental?
I'll jump in. We have 2 spaces at Victory Gardens, and we have a couple of resident theaters presently. And in addition to that, a whole lot of other people constantly asking us about other ways in which they might be able to access space rental-wise. Thankfully, all of our resident theaters are all theaters thus far that are also embracing these changes. It's tricky because we are not necessarily there to police and ensure that they're implementing the things that they said they're doing, because they're a whole other company. And so I really appreciate this question, because they have made their own commitments, like we as an organization have made our own commitments and plans. And I think we get to be in community and in deeper conversation with them, and we'll have to assess if they're not living up to it, which I highly doubt will be true with the companies we have in residence. But should that ever happen, I think we would want to engage with them and see how we could support, frankly, and figure out ways in which we can help, honestly figure out how we can ensure that it's possible for them to adhere to it. So.
And in terms of the question asking, we can't afford, implying we can't afford to rent a venue for another day. I mean, so as Danielle, your professor said, theater is the art you make in the time you have to make it. So if the institution cannot afford that extra day of rent, then you actually need to say, we're gonna do a great show in the time we have. Let's plan how to use that time to the best purpose, right? And not spend your time like, oh, this could have been 100% better if we'd only had that extra 4 hours. That's kind of like, one of those theater things where it's like, that's never going to read. It's like, if they can tell that you missed 4 hours of tech rehearsal, then you've got bigger problems in your show.
That's a great point. Did anybody else have any final comments that they want to talk about in regards to eliminating 10 out of 12s? No final thoughts. Excellent. Well, I really want to thank both USIT for hosting this panel, as well as Ken, Matt, Janet, Alice, and Michael for taking the time out and being here today. We know that time is valuable so much that when we try to cut a 10 out of 12, some people are up in arms about it. So thank you for spending this hour with us. And thank you, David, for hosting.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for moderating. And thank you to everyone here for your comments and insight. I would like to say that programs like these through USITT are available on our YouTube channel, on our social media, and we are proud to be the space hosting conversations among professionals. Tomorrow, you can also find one of our community conversations with professionals from the LGBTQ community, and we will continue these programs and conversations throughout the year. So we invite people to join us. I would note that these are sponsored by the Tanisha Jefferson Fund for Inclusion, along with much of USITT's work on inclusion and accessibility. So if you would like to know more about our programs, please check us out online at usitt.org. Thank you so much, everyone, and we wish everyone all the best. Have a lovely rest of your day.